Boris gives Macron geography lesson as EU leader didn't know Northern Ireland part of UK. A dumbstruck Boris Johnson found himself having to explain to the French president that Northern Ireland is part of the same country as the rest of Britain. Mr. Johnson, who was accompanied by his chief negotiator Lord Frost throughout, was said to be taken aback by an EU attitude that Northern Ireland is a separate country. This was highlighted in the meeting with President Macron when the Prime Minister asked him whether he would be angered if Toulouse sausages were blocked from going to Paris by a foreign power. Macron is understood to have retorted, "Not a good comparison because Paris and Toulouse are both part of the same country." A dumbstruck Prime Minister then replied, "Northern Ireland and Britain are part of the same country as well." A senior source from the British delegation said, Mr. Johnson, was pretty struck by it as quite revealing as to how they see the issue. It completely explains what underlies the comments he made. BBC's Andrew Marr mocks Macron with impersonation of French president after Brexit row. The BBC's Andrew Marr poked fun at French President Emmanuel Macron this morning with a bizarre impersonation of the leader, which was even accompanied by a French accent. Andrew Marr ridiculed Emmanuel Macron this morning with a bizarre impersonation of the French president. The jibe came as the BBC host was reviewing this morning's papers with the BBC's Laura Queensberg and political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Mr. Marr mocked Mr. Macron after reports that the French president told Boris Johnson that Northern Ireland was not part of the UK. The remarks from Mr. Macron came during a bilateral meeting at the G7 in Cornwall when the issue of the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol was raised. Mr. Marr said, "The other big story today is the increasingly fractious standoff between the UK and the EU over Northern Ireland." Mr. Cole said, "World leaders haven't been able to meet for 2 years and they come back and meet each other and they've fallen out over Brexit. Who would have seen that coming?" Macron appears to have suggested that Northern Ireland isn't really part of the UK. Mr. Marr responded, "So Boris Johnson had said to Macron, how would you feel if Toulouse sausages couldn't be exported to Paris because of the French courts?" He then added a French accent and said, to which Macron said, "Aha oho, it's different, non?" Mr. Cole continued, "That's a diplomatic clangor, I would say. We are years into this Brexit row and it seems that some of the key players still don't understand the fundamentals. You have a major leader in the European Union willingly not understanding the issues." Mr. Johnson, who was accompanied by his chief negotiator Lord Frost throughout the meeting with his French counterpart, was said to be taken aback by an EU attitude that Northern Ireland is a separate country. A senior source from the British delegation said, Mr. Johnson, was pretty struck by it as quite revealing as to how they see the issue. It completely explains what underlies the comments he made. Earlier this morning, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab launched a scathing rebuke of the ignorant comments made by them about Northern Ireland. He said reports of leaders suggesting Northern Ireland is not part of the UK was not only offensive but causes great concern. Mr. Raab slammed the bloc leaders for daring to question the UK's national makeup whilst the British would never question areas in Spain such Catalonia or the Flemish part of Belgium as he demanded a bit of respect. He told Sky News, "Could you imagine if we talked about Catalonia, the Flemish part of Belgium, one of the Länder in Germany, Northern Italy, Corsica in France as different countries? We need a bit of respect here. And also, frankly, an appreciation over the situation for all communities in Northern Ireland."